Hello there everybody and welcome. My name is James and I wanted to give you a brief description of this drawing here that I've done, if I can make it brief. It is about a storyline that I've created called Emperia, which is all about this fictional world that I've created and what happens in it. But this lady here that we see before us is a very prominent character within that storyline, as she rules over much of the world that I'm gonna talk to you about, and we're going to talk about her to start with. So this is Maria Charlotta Canavia de Charles, and she was part of this very successful and wealthy royal family known as the de Charles line, and they were the imperial rulers of this world. Their empire spanned half of the planet's globe, and so she looks incredibly wealthy and magnificent in her coronation attire here. So this drawing would have been done just after the Empress's coronation. So she would have sat down and posed for this picture here. But as we'll take a look at it here. So on her head you can see there's a very oversized crown, the imperial crown, the crown of state, and this was the most important crown in the collection and would have been featured in the Empress's official portraits as her sort of emblem of her wealth and her position and her power. The crown itself sits upon a sort of cushion on the Empress's head, a sort of white ermine cushion that surrounded the base of the crown. And then on top there's a beautiful framework of a sort of spikes made of gilt bronze. And then above that is a sort of very oversized red velvet cap on the crown. And then above that we can see what looks like the fleur de lis, which was a symbol for the French monarchy. But here I've changed it a bit because this emblem that I've drawn out here is supposed to represent the de Charles line within the story. I have drawn the fleur de lis a bit different to sort of make it more my own. But yes, that's the symbol of the monarchy. Now you might be saying, what's that above the fleur de lis? What is that sitting on the crown? This sort of strange drapery. Well, that is a set of two ostrich feathers that was very much a symbol of the imperial family and would quite often be added to their crowns and scepters, because really it was an emblem, and the Empress really brought it to the new designs. She added it because to her it symbolized the imperial family, the white ostrich feather, compared to the aristocracy who would wear sort of light grey or light brown colours in light brown coloured feathers on their crowns. But the Empress wore the white ostrich feather because it represents the imperial family, the line, the de Charles family. And now you might be wondering, if you do know, this picture looks very similar to that of Queen Victoria, and you'll be right. Queen Victoria's coronation portrait really inspired me with this drawing here. I take a lot of inspiration off of Queen Victoria when it comes to my art, because I know there's a lot of varied opinions on her, but she does seem like a very interesting character to me, and I really thought that pose really looked magnificent and so opulent and just what I was looking for. So what I did was I tweaked it to make it more my own, but essentially, yes, she's very similar to that of Queen Victoria. And even her clothes are similar to that of Queen Victoria, but again, I have changed it a lot to make it more my own. But the template in general was that similar to Queen Victoria. The Empress's hair is sort of in like an updo, and she has a bit coming down her shoulder there. She wears jewels in her hair and around her neck. You can see on her forehead she's wearing a central emblem, a central gem That was sort of one of her statements, one of her fashion statements. Under all this drapery, she would have worn a very wide panier. And now a panier is a very 18th century fashion go-to, really. It was a very prominent thing with the upper classes and sometimes with the lower classes. But it's more or less like a sort of cage that was put under the dress, not a hoop skirt, which you might mistake for Victorian times, but a pannier was simply just something that was tied around the waist with an extension of a cage each side to make the appearance of the skirt wide, but from looking at it from the sides was flat, more or less. Compared to the Victorian hoop skirt, which was very round, the 18th century pannier was very wide and sort of square looking. So under all these layers of fabric that we can see, all of her ermine robes would have been a very wide pannier. And again, that was her fashion choice. She'd always dress formally around the court, wearing especially wide panniers. And we can see she's sort of almost covered up by layers and layers and layers of ermine robes, because she's wearing a lot, you see. It really makes her look grand to me. And they're sort of folding and cascading all down her dress, all down the stairs, because she's sitting, we can't really see here. But if we was to look further away, if we was to back up, you would see that she was sitting on like a raised dais, walked up by steps, and all of her robes would have been cascading down the steps there. And you can see from her hair that she has lace kind of like draping down her back from the back of her hair. Now, it was a rule in this storyline that women, especially upper class women, should cover up the back of their hair. It was a religious thing. It was seen as very, you were sort of called a loose woman if you didn't wear this lace on your head to cover up the back of your hair. The Empress also has lace hanging down from her ruff. Now, her ruff is that enormous thing there on the back of her dress that goes around her neck. I call it a ruff because it's similar to that of an Elizabethan sort of collar ruff, but it doesn't go all around her neck, it just goes round the back, and it's attached to her shoulders round the back. And layers of lace sort of dangle off of the edges of the ruff there. And she's wearing lots of jewellery. And her pose is, like I say, like Victoria, but instead of holding a newspaper in her right hand, or her left hand, shall I say, she is holding the orb. Her hand's sort of laid out, and she's holding the orb, which is very oversized. But that was the whole idea of this picture. The crown jewels are drawn oversized to represent the Empress's imperial power. She is holding her most enormous piece in this collection of the jewels, which is her scepter. Because when she stands up, that scepter would have touched the floor. So when she's walking around the palace or walking around anywhere, she usually carried her scepter, which sort of she carried around like it was a staff. But yes, that was a symbol of her magnificence. Is this enormous scepter, and again it is topped off with these ostrich feathers, which I think make it look so, I don't know, just magnificent, really. And you can see there's something twisted all around the scepter that goes all the way down. That's a dragon. So at the top would have been its head, and then it would have cascaded all the way around the scepter. And then we can see all this red drapery, which is kind of like blowing in the wind, because I really wanted to add that sense of dramaticism to the drawing. This, drapery sort of flying about in the wind, because I wanted, you see in a lot of royal portraits, they're usually surrounded by drapery, sort of blowing in the wind, and that's what I wanted to add to this, because although this drawing looks otherworldly to me, I wanted to add that sort of characteristic royal feature that we see a lot in royal drawings and paintings. We can see all these folds in the fabric there, but then in the background we can see a shot, a very small shot of the Empress's Palace of Strasbourg. Now this, I do talk about this palace a lot in my storyline because it's so unusual, and the way it works is so unusual. It's a strange palace because of the Empress's extreme power. She has a lot of money, you see, she's very wealthy. She gains wealth from trade and expanding her empire. So she has built up this enormous fortune. So she's chosen this country house away from the capital city in Dompierre, her home country. She's chosen this sort of country house away from the capital. She never liked it in the capital. When she married her husband, the emperor, and they moved into the capital city palace, she never liked it. So she wanted some kind of residence to escape the gossip and the intrigue and the smog and the pollution of the capital city. So she chose herself a small country house outside of the capital, several miles away, with its own estate and park, which she chose to use as her dwelling, her domain. And she began to expand it because the Empress, from her childhood, when she was living in her home country, when she was a child, called Strasbourg, because the Empress is a foreign-born princess, she married into the family. So she was a foreign-born princess, and then she became Empress when she married the Emperor. But yes, so she chose this house and she expanded it, and she made it her own. Like I say, even when she was a child, she had this sort of eye for grandeur. She was asking her nurses and people who attended her, to dress her up, and she was always constantly renovating her apartments back at home. But now that she had a huge area, like a domain, to do what she wanted with, she really started to expand the house and make it sort of more opulent, really. She built a set of formal gardens round the back, and then she sort of slowly started to develop the house. And then the emperor chimed in, and he liked the idea of the project, so he built himself a wing attached to the main house, exactly the same size and proportion, connected together. So each one of them had their own domain, their own building to do what they wanted with, but from the outside it looked like one building. So as they were living there and expanding the palace, they both were prolific builders and they liked to expand. But the Empress herself was really taking charge, and she really made the palace enormous. And so by the time years pass on, Strasbourg is an enormous complex of wings in all different styles. There were many sort of riots and things, and semi-revolutions, because the aristocracy did not like the idea of the Empress gaining all this power, and so what happened is they tried to revolt against her. But to crush them and to keep an eye on them, she invited all of the aristocracy to move in with her at Strasbourg so she could keep an eye on them, essentially. She is inspired by Louis XIV in that aspect. So the court of Strasbourg is enormous, and it's ever growing all the time. People are moving into Strasbourg all the time. Anybody of any importance in and around the empire and within the home country comes to move to Strasbourg. That means, members of the gentry, aristocracy, the clergy, anybody of importance to the crown would move into Strasbourg. So not only is there palaces that accommodate the imperial family, because they all lived in their own sort of palaces in like a big complex, all sort of near each other, separated by courtyards. But then when the aristocracy move in, they build their own houses on the site. The wealthy aristocracy would build their own homes on the site. So, for instance, the dukes and the marquises and the earls, anybody with that kind of wealth built their own palaces within the complex. So from above, Strasbourg would have looked like a small city, really, of all different buildings and all shapes and sizes. But actually, it was one building, which is lots of separated into different sections. The central part of Strasbourg was the most symmetrical bit, you know. But then on the part facing the town, there would have been expansion of all kinds of different houses and things. And then around the back of the palace, that was also expanded. So from this very symmetrical facade was miles and miles of formal gardens, which were constantly being renovated. The Empress had a sort of thing like a butterfly mind, and she really liked to, constantly redevelop things, make things ever more grand, such as the interiors of the palace. She really liked to expand and constantly redevelop them, overlapping the old decor with a new one. She was constantly renovating the interiors of the palace to suit her own. When she was dying in her bed, in her old age, she was still signing documents to have new parts of the palace built on, and new rooms added, etc., new alterations done to the palace and the grounds. But, she died, and so her son, Augustus, the heir to the throne, the emperor to be, continued her last building projects, but he was not much of a builder like his mother was. So, I hope you enjoyed that little talk there. I will focus more on the world, but because we're talking about this picture in particular, about the Empress, I thought it most appropriate to talk about her and all things concerning her. So thank you very much for watching that. I do appreciate it. And don't forget to give me a like and subscribe. And yeah, tell me what you think. What you think of this very grand lady, if you think she's too much or too little, if you like her, if you don't. But either way, she's part of this story, and she's a character that I created for this storyline. So thank you again, and I'll see you later.